Teach Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are the top 20 commanders from Dominaria United. And this is the first time that I'm ever doing a top 20 commanders list for a set, and for obvious reasons here, because there was so many commanders from this set, I couldn't nail it down to just 10, and I had contemplated doing all the commanders, sort of doing a ranking of all the commanders from the set. There's just way too many. That video would be like 3 hours long. I actually had a little bit of a hard time figuring out exactly how many commanders are from this set. Of course, we have a bunch of reprints. We have Dominaria United and we have Dominaria United Commander. There's a whole bunch of reprints of old commanders in the Dominaria United Commander set. So just doing a simple search wasn't going to do it. Also, there are Planeswalkers as commanders. I think there are 3 new Planeswalkers as commanders from this set. So that also confuses things. As far as I can tell, there are 41 commanders in the actual Dominaria United set, and then there are 31 in the Dominaria United Commander set for a total of 72 commanders. That's a whole lot. And in fact, it is second all time, only behind Commander Legends. So that's a whole lot to talk about if you were talking about all of it. However, a lot of these commanders are really sort of just very generalized, I find, and of course, they're not going to make my top 20 list. There is a whole bunch that either fit specific themes or they are so generalized and so open-ended that I think they're not going to be very popular at all. It's tough to say though. Sometimes you have very open-ended commanders that you can go a million different directions with, and sometimes people won't go after them because they're too open-ended, and sometimes people will love the fact that they are so open-ended. Also, there's a lot of commanders here that I think if you're doing a particular theme in your deck where your commander didn't really matter that much, it was just I'm putting this deck together in certain colors and the commander, I'll just pick whatever happens to fit with what I'm doing. There are probably a lot of commanders here that you might actually be able to swap out with. So for example, if you were doing an Azorius Spellslinger theme, there's actually not that many Azorius Spellslinger commanders, right? If you're doing instants and sorceries. In Izzet colors, there's a ton. In Azorius, surprisingly, there's not that many. So maybe Tura Kenurid Sky Knight might be a good fit there, right? 2 white, blue, blue, human knight, 3/3 with flying. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. This is not a fantastic commander as a build around because the instant and sorcery theme doesn't necessarily fit great with the soldier theme, I don't think. But if you were already doing maybe an Azorius soldier theme, this could be a good commander for it because obviously there wasn't really one before. Or if you're doing an Azorius instant and sorcery theme and you just didn't have a great commander for it before, now you got a pretty decent one, right? Elas Ilcor Sadistic Pilgrim is a really interesting one. White and a black Phyrexian Core Cleric 2/2 with Death Touch. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. Whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. This is a very interesting one that I'm not sure if it's going to be popular or not. Again, it is so open-ended, right? You're sort of have a blood artist type of effect in the command zone. So there might be a lot of people out there that are playing aristocrat style of decks that will just replace this as their commander. I think this is going to go in the 99 of a ton of decks for sure. All those Orzhov aristocrats decks, this will go in. If you're just in a life gain deck in Orzhov colors, you might want to throw this guy in there. But again, this guy's so open-ended that you could do almost anything with him. And if you're in a theme in black and white where you're just a very creature heavy deck, I think this might be a good commander, right? If you don't have a commander that necessarily fit with what you were doing and you're black and white creature heavy, this is a great fit because whenever you play a creature, it's going to gain you a life. And whenever one of your creatures dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Just a nice little advantage to what you're already doing in your deck, right? There's a whole lot of commanders like that in this set that I think people are going to use, but definitely aren't going to be very popular at all. Getting to my actual list now, finally, Ohabi Kaleria coming in at number 20. 1, a green and a white elf archer, 1/3 with reach. Untap all archers you control during each other player's untap step. Yes, that's right. We have an archer commander. Finally, whenever an archer you control deals damage to a creature, you may pay 2 if you do draw a card. And of course, once you start looking at archers in the game, these abilities will make lots of sense, right? Lots of them have those tap abilities where they're dealing damage to other creatures. So of course, the untapping is going to be fantastic, being able to do it on your opponent's turns as well. And of course, the draw ability is always fantastic, stapled on a commander. So got to give this guy a mention. We finally have a great archer commander. White and green are the perfect colors for this. Coming in at number 19, the Peregrine Dynamo. 3 mana legendary artifact creature construct 1/5 with haste. Pay 1 and tap. Copy target activated or triggered ability you control from another legendary source that's not a commander. You may choose new targets for the copy. So I gotta be honest, I almost missed this guy. When I first saw him, I didn't realize he was a legendary artifact creature because we don't get those very often. It has been a long time since we have. I thought this was just a regular artifact creature, and when I looked at the ability, I thought, oh, well, that's not very good. Why would you want to put this in your deck? Because you can't target your commander with it, so it seems awful in the 99, and it probably isn't very good in the 99 unless you're doing legendary tribal, in which case you're gonna have a whole bunch of creatures that you can be copying those abilities with. But this is actually a commander, and I gotta give it a mention. First of all, because it's another colorless option. I've been looking to make a colorless deck for a long time. I like the idea of having a colorless deck. I like the challenge of it personally for me as a deck builder. I don't like any of the Eldrazi. I would never make an Eldrazi deck. I'm not a big fan of Hope of Girpur. Karn, unfortunately, has a bit of a bad rep for destroying people's lands. Now we finally have a fun, interesting commander that I think I could make a colorless deck around. I did look it up because I was curious how many things you can actually use in this deck, okay? As far as colorless legendary permanents go, there was about 57, 58, right? It's not an exact number because a lot of the activated or triggered abilities might be things you do not want to copy, right? So for example, Blackblade Reforged has an activated ability, right? Of course, it's an equip, but that's not going to do anything, right? If I copy the equip, it doesn't really do anything. So you could include that as a legendary colorless card with an activated ability, but copying that activated ability is meaningless, so there's no reason to do so. And of course, we can't copy mana abilities here as well, so any of those legendary lands or legendary mana rocks, those don't work either. So what I could find, it's about 58 cards that you can copy that will work in this deck. I think it's going to be interesting to see some people putting this deck together. Coming in at number 18, Wrath Weatherlight Stalwart. White and a blue human wizard, 1/3. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may tap 2 untapped creatures you control. If you do, draw a card. And you can pay 3 white creatures you control, get +1/+1, and gain vigilance until end of turn. I'm sure this is a commander that isn't going to make a whole lot of people's top lists. I like it for a bunch of reasons, and I'll tell you why. First of all, it's 2 mana. I like cheap commanders. Get it out right away, and I can start going to town on whatever my deck is doing. It is an instant and sorcery theme, but it is also a creature theme. I like that. I like when we're not so one-dimensional with what we're doing, right? You got to have creatures, of course, because you want to be tapping untapped creatures you control, but you also need those instants and sorceries. So you're going to have a nice mix in this deck. And like I say all the time, if your commander says draw a card on it, that's always a good thing. Having that card draw in the command zone means I don't really have to put a whole bunch of card draw in my deck. I actually really like this commander. I think it's an interesting build around. Coming in at number 17, the Lady of Oteria, 3 green and a red avatar 5/5. You may tap 3 untapped dwarves you control rather than pay this spell's mana cost. That's pretty handy. At the beginning of each end step, if a land you control was put into your graveyard from the battlefield this turn, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put any number of dwarf cards from among them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. So this is one that when I talked about it in my spoiler video, I wasn't super impressed with. I thought, okay, Gruul Dwarves isn't great. There's obviously not a lot of green dwarves. Adding green to a deck is always good though. And of course, we're doing the lands thing as well. So now we're sort of in dwarf tribal and also land. I thought it was a weird mix, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought this would be an interesting, fun build. This doesn't have a draw a card on it, but filling your hand with cards on your end step basically is the same thing, and in fact can be even better if you can stack the top of your library. I think this could be a really good commander, and I like, again, the combination. Rather than I'm being very one-dimensional in what I'm doing, I'm just giving all dwarves +1/+1 in haste or something. Like, that kind of stuff is boring. I like when you're doing the tribal stuff, but doing it in a more interesting way, and this is a very interesting way that they decided to do a dwarf tribal commander. I like it a lot. Coming in at number 16, Jedidojanan Mercenary, 1, a white and a blue cat mercenary 3/3. When Jedidojanan Mercenary or another legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay green. If you do, create a 2/2 green cat warrior creature token with Forest Walk. I really like this one for a couple of different reasons. First of all, it's a bad commander. Just in case anyone doesn't realize that, we have the white, the green, and the blue here, so you're in all 3 of those colors. So that's pretty great. I love that they combined the other 2 Jedidojanans here, right? So we have the original Azorius, horrible vanilla Jedidojanan, and then we have the green version, and they sort of combine the 2, which I thought was really really neat the way they did this. So flavor-wise, this is fantastic. Again, we're doing a couple of different things. So we're doing Legendary Tribal, right? Which is great. There's a lot you can do there. Again, you are in 3 colors. So obviously you're going to have a ton to choose from. We're also doing the token theme. So we're in a little bit of a token theme as well. We are also doing Cat Warriors. So we're in the Cat Tribal thing as well. And of course, in Bant colors, there's a ton of support there for Cat Tribal. Your commander, of course, being a cat as well. So again, I love all the different directions you can go here. I think when I play against the Jedidojanan Mercenary deck, everyone's deck is going to be a little bit different, which I really, really like in a commander. Coming in at number 15, Braids Arisen Nightmare. 1 black Nightmare 3/3. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. So again, this might be a commander that a lot of people aren't too excited about, but I put it on this list for 2 reasons. 1, I love that they made a sort of fixed version of the original mono black Braids. Of course, the original one is banned in Commander. You can't play it. A lot of people are sad to see that. They made a version that I think is a nice, fair, more fun, not so oppressive fixed version of the original one. I think it's really, really great. And you can actually make a fantastic deck here. You are a little bit limited in what you can do, right? You're not going to have an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker in play all the time that you can sacrifice to this ability. Sometimes you might have to make some tough decisions. Maybe I have to sacrifice one of my lands to my commander's ability because I don't have anything else that I want to sacrifice right now. Maybe I got to sacrifice my Soul Ring because I don't have any other artifacts around to sacrifice, and I want my opponents to have to make that choice. This can actually be a bit of a difficult deck to pilot, and I like that. I like a deck that isn't super obvious, and it's a little challenging to build around, and also a little challenging to play. And then again, you get into the politics aspect as well. For each of your opponents, they're going to have to make that decision. They can sacrifice something if they don't want you to draw a card. You get into that situation as well, which I actually think makes for a fun commander game. Great job on this design for the new mono black Braids. Coming in at number 14, Aisha Tanaka Armorer. 3, a white and a blue human artificer, 2/4. When Aisha Tanaka Armorer attacks, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may put any number of artifact cards with mana value less than or equal to Aisha's power from among them onto the battlefield tapped. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. And also, Aisha can't be blocked as long as defending player controls 3 or more artifacts. So of course, I first have to give a shout out to the original Aisha Tanaka, the one and only banding commander. For anyone out there looking to make an Azorius banding deck, this is a commander that actually has banding on it. Also has that counter target activated ability from an artifact source. So this is a little bit on theme to the original, but of course they made a much more interesting commander here, and this is a pretty decent ability, right? You're going to look at the top 4 cards of your library, put any number of artifact cards, and I love whenever I see any number on a commander, any of them with mana value less than or equal to Aisha's power. And of course, our commander's power is 2, but there's lots of great ways to manipulate that. So we're going to get anything mana value 2 or less automatically directly onto the battlefield. That's fantastic. They're going to be tapped, but unless it's a mana rock, you probably don't care. The obvious direction here to go is with equipment, of course, because equipment are artifacts that we can put directly into play. Most of them are pretty inexpensive, and they're also going to boost our commander's power, which means we can get even more stuff into play. Ayesha can't be blocked as long as defending player controls 3 or more artifacts is also fantastic. First of all, because we want to be attacking with our commander, but also a player having 3 or more artifacts is almost a guarantee. If you got 3 opponents, it's almost assured that at least one of them is going to have 3 or more artifacts, especially with all those treasure tokens lying around. Coming in at number 13, Tatyova, Steward of Tides. That's right, they made another Tatyova. Green, and a blue 3/3 land. Creatures you control have flying. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands, up to 1 target land you control becomes a 3/3 elemental creature with haste. It's still a land. I really like this. This to me, again, is sort of like a more fair version of the original Tatyova. I hate the original Tatyova. It is one of my least favorite commanders to play against. It is one of the, in my opinion, worst designed commanders. Having a commander who rewards you for doing something that you would normally do anyway, I think is a really bad design. I really like this new Tatyova. Maybe I bumped this higher up the list because I think it's a fairer, more interesting version of the original Tatyova. I don't know, maybe. I really like it. There isn't really a land creatures commander, right? We do have it a little bit. This is one that is definitely focused on the idea of turning our lands into 2 creatures, which of course there is tons of support for that. You can use that Awaken mechanic, which you don't see very often in this deck. That would be pretty interesting. I actually made a Morite of the Frost deck recently, which was a Simic lands deck. The idea there being that I used my commander to copy a land, and then I had a whole bunch of that stuff as well. So you could check out that deck tech if you want some ideas for this one, because I think it would probably be really similar. Coming in at number 12, Garna Bloodfist of Keld. So we have another Garna, 1 black, red, human berserker, 4/3. Whenever another creature you control dies, draw a card if it was attacking. Otherwise, Garna deals 1 damage to each opponent. I mean, wow, that's fantastic. Again, this is another one of those commanders that has that very open-ended ability that you could do a whole lot of different things with, and also probably goes in the 99 of a lot of decks. In particular, Carder Doomscourge decks I think are gonna love this new Garna, but this one I put on the list and fairly high up the list because man, this is really good. Another creature you control dies, draw a card if it was attacking. That's pretty easy to do. I mean, first of all, you can just throw your creatures mercilessly at your opponents, and if they block and those creatures die, you get to draw a card. That seems like a pretty good payoff. If your creatures die in any other way, it's going to deal 1 damage to each of your opponents. Also fantastic. And of course, as I talked about in my most recent rules video about combat, your creatures are attacking as long as it's still the combat phase, right? So if your opponents don't want to block your creatures, that's fine. You get in for damage, and then after damage is dealt to that opponent, then you can sacrifice your creature. It's still an attacking creature, and you'll get to draw a card. You can really make a pretty fantastic deck around this Garna, I think. Really great commander, in my opinion. Coming in at number 11, Zyra, the Golden Sting. 1 green, red, and a black insect assassin, 3/3, flying and haste. Whenever Zyra, the Golden Sting, attacks, put an egg counter on another target creature with an egg counter on it. When that creature dies, if it has an egg counter on it, draw a card and create a 1/1 black insect creature token with flying. This commander is really high up the list, mostly for flavor. I absolutely love the flavor of this card. I think it's a pretty interesting build around. It's definitely not a super powerful commander. It's only an attack trigger, so unless you have extra combats or copying ability effects, you're only going to get the 1 egg counter every turn. But it's such an interesting ability, and the flavor is fantastic. Again, I sort of gushed over the art and how funny and interesting it was when I did this in my spoiler video. Pretty ridiculous, honestly. But also the flavor of it being the Golden Sting. It's an insect assassin. It's stinging its victims, laying that egg, and when the egg hatches, they die. You get to draw a card because you're collecting the bounty, and then you also get that baby insect that is there as well. Super interesting, tons of flavor, and also lots of ways you can build around it, right? You're putting those egg counters on creatures. You're also getting the insect tokens. You could do a little bit of an insect tribal here. Really interesting commander, I think. Coming in at number 10, Myria, Scholar of Antiquity. 1, a red and a green elf artificer, 3/3. Tap an untapped non-token artifact you control to add a green. Yes, you heard that correctly. Tap 2 untapped non-token artifacts you control. Exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. And yes, just to reiterate, this commander cost 1, a red and a green. And I think a lot of people might think this is a terrible commander because it is a Gruul commander that is doing artifacts. I really like that about this. I love commanders that are sort of off color, where it's not super obvious what you want to be doing, where it's not super easy that you want to be doing stuff. There's a lot of cards that we probably have never seen in the format before that might get some love because of a commander like this, because you don't see this theme very often. Also, what this commander is doing is entirely unique, right? On top of the fact that you have a Gruul artifact commander, also, we can't just do the treasure thing here, right? Whenever it comes to artifacts, people are like, hey, just do treasures. There's so much treasure support now that it just makes any artifact theme, I think, super easy. Can't do that here because it's non-token artifact. I really like the challenge of building this deck. I like the interesting things it's doing. We've never seen anything like this before. And of course, we've never seen a Gruul artifact commander before as well. For me, this is such an interesting build around, and it's so unique. I put it as high as 10 on this list. I think it's great. Coming in at number 9, the ever-changing Dane. White, blue, and a black shapeshifter, 3/3. Pay 1, sacrifice another creature. The ever-changing Dane becomes a copy of the sacrificed creature, except it has this ability. Straight up clone commander, and they're doing it in a very interesting way. Again, another reprint that they did a fantastic job with. The original Dane, Half Dane, was a very underwhelming commander that had a very, I mean, let's be honest, lame clone type ability. This one is way more interesting, way more flavorful. Again, the idea of a clone clone or a doppelganger killing the person that they are copying is very flavorful. That is what you typically see. And again, there is a lot of different ways you can go with this. I like the I temporarily reanimate a creature and then sacrifice it to copy it before it goes away. I like the I can steal my opponent's creatures and sacrifice them, copy them, and then of course I'm killing my opponent's creature as well. Very open-ended, a whole lot you can do with it. This is going to be a popular one in the format for sure. Coming in at number 8, Lagamos, Hand of Hatred. 1 black and a red human shaman, 1/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 2/1 red elemental creature token with trample and haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Tap, search your library for a card and put it into your hand, then shuffle. Activate only if 5 or more creatures died this turn. So we got 2 great abilities here. And of course, the one about searching your library is going to be the big one. That's really going to grab everyone's attention. Of course, tapping your commander just to tutor for any card is fantastic. Of course, I like that they put that stipulation on it. It's not super difficult to get that, but it's definitely not something you're going to be getting every turn, I don't think. I mean, let's not forget about that first ability. I actually think if this card was just that first ability, it's not bad. It is not bad build around to spit out a token creature every turn. It's also an elemental. You could even do a little bit of an elemental theme here even, but just having that creature every single turn, even if you're just doing a Rakdos sacrifice theme, would be fantastic if this was your commander. But of course, tacking on that tutor ability as well is great. And as I talked about in the spoiler video I did, I think the best way to go with this is just use those black I make my creature indestructible effects. There's a bunch of them now. And if you want to cast a board wipe, or if anyone else wants to cast a board wipe, you respond with I make my commander indestructible. Everyone else's creatures die. Not only does my commander survive, but now I get to activate the ability and go search for any card. And heck, it could just be another I make my commander indestructible effect if you want to. Rinse and repeat, right? I think this is going to be a pretty popular commander in the format for even just the reason that people like the idea of having a tutor on their commander. Coming in at number 7, Ratadrak of Urborg. I think I got that right. 2 white and a black zombie wizard, 3/3. Vigilance, ward 2. Other zombies you control have vigilance. Whenever another legendary creature you control dies, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary and it's a 2/2 black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. So again, as I talked about in the spoiler video I did already about this seems like a zombie tribal commander because it's a zombie and it has zombies you control have vigilance. But just like with the mono blue Geralf, you don't want to get swept up in the whole idea of, oh, well, my zombies have flying, so I guess I'm in mono blue zombie tribal. No, that's just an added bonus to what the main ability is doing. This commander, you want to build around that last ability. Whenever another legendary creature you control dies, you get a copy of it. That's a fantastic ability that you can easily build around. It just also happens to be a zombie, so now it has vigilance. And you can do a little bit of zombie tribal here because you do have your zombies dying and stuff. You can put Death Baron in here. I thought Necromancer's Covenant was a good fit because it is white and black zombie tribal stuff. So you can do a little bit of that, but I wouldn't go too far that way because you definitely want to be taking advantage of that last ability. There's a ton you can do there, and because the token is not legendary, that means you can reanimate the original one again and have 2 copies of a legendary creature in play, which can also be really, really fantastic. So there is a ton you can do here. Again, a very unique commander. We've never seen anything like this before. I always like to bump those commanders up the list. Really great build around, I think, and I think it's also going to be a popular one. Coming in at number 6, Soul of Windgrace. 1 black, red, and a green cat avatar, 5/4. When Soul of Windgrace enters the battlefield or attacks, you may put a land card from a graveyard onto the battlefield tapped under your control. Pay a green and discard a land card, you gain 3 life. Pay 1 and a red, discard a land card, draw a card. Pay 2 and a black, discard a land card. Soul of Windgrace gains indestructible end of turn, tap it. So when I talked about this card, I said I think this might be even better than the original Lord Windgrace, and it might be the best lands commander we have in the format now. I got a little bit of pushback on that. I think I'm right. I really do. I didn't even catch the fact that this is put a land card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So you can steal lands out of your opponent's graveyards as well. You can even do a land destruction theme here if you want to. Destroy your opponent's lands, attack with your commander and steal them. Sounds pretty nasty, but it is a direction you can go with this commander. I think there's just a lot more directions to go. Rather than just, I play a landfall theme like most land commanders are, there's so many different directions you can go here where you're doing a bit of a graveyard theme. You can steal lands from your opponents. You can gain life with this commander. You're drawing cards, which of course is always fantastic. And I always really like the ability to protect your commander. So that part where you give your commander indestructible, I think is also fantastic. I like everything going on here. If I were to build a Lance deck, this is definitely the one that I would go for. Coming in at number 5, Zyra, Eternal Schemer. White, blue, and a black human wizard 1/4 with flying. Enchantment creatures you control have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. And even if we just had that ability on there, I think this would be a pretty interesting build around. But we also get 1 and a white, target non-aura enchantment you control becomes a creature in addition to its other types and has base power and toughness, each equal to its mana value. So much you can do there. Of course, we are in enchantment tribal, just like the original Zyra. And of course, the original Zyra could go in this deck, no question about it. It's going to go fetch those enchantments for you that you can then turn into creatures. I just like how interesting this is, where you can do the enchantment creature thing that's already existing, right? There are cards that create enchantment creatures already in the format. So you can use that stuff there. Giving them Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof is fantastic. And then you can just put all your favorite enchantments in this deck. And if anyone tries to remove them, yes, you're going to turn them into a creature, but you're also giving them Hexproof because now they are an enchantment creature, right? So if you got that Ristic Study and your opponent tries to remove it, you just turn it into a creature and now it gets Hexproof and that spell will fizzle. Pretty fantastic. So just that alone, the ability to protect my enchantments is pretty great. You can also use that ability to help close out the game if you want to as well. And I think one of my favorite cards of all time, Soul Sculptor, is a very interesting card in this deck because Soul Sculptor turns creatures into enchantments and your Zyra turns enchantments into creatures. So things get pretty interesting there when you throw that guy in the deck. Very interesting commander for sure. Coming in at number 4, Hazazon, Shaper of Sand, red, green, and a white human warrior 3/3, Desert Walk, which of course we have never seen before, which means your commander cannot be blocked if defending player controls a desert. And there is surprisingly a lot of those in the format. You may play desert land cards from your graveyard. Pretty interesting. And whenever a desert enters the battlefield under your control, create 2 1/1 red, green, and white sand warrior creature tokens. Pretty darn interesting commander, I think. Again, there's so much going on here. Flavor-wise, absolutely fantastic. Great callback to the original Hazazon that was doing something a little similar. I love the sort of desert tribal here. We're also in a lands theme. A lot of the deserts want to be sacrificing themselves and other deserts. So getting them back from the graveyard certainly fits that theme. You're also creating those sand warrior tokens, which you can do a lot there. So again, I like that this isn't super direct. Obviously you want to do the desert thing, no question about that, but there's a lot of different ways you can go with it. And then what are you doing with those sand warrior tokens as well? You can do a token theme. There's a lot of great stuff for support in Naya colors for a token theme. There's even the warrior theme, right? These are sand warriors and you can even do a little bit of support there for that as well. Remember, your commander's also a warrior. Lots you can do here. I think, again, there's going to be a lot of Hazazon decks out there. There's going to be a popular one for sure, but they're not all going to be the same, right? I think a lot of people are going to go in different directions with this. Even though it might seem obvious what you're doing, I really don't think it is. Other than I'm putting deserts in my deck, what else are you doing? There's a lot of open area for you to work with, which I like a lot. Coming in at number 3, Torwaki the Younger, the very first commander I talked about from Dominaria United. 3 black and a red human archer 3/3. Reach and lifelink. If another source you control would deal non-combat damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage +1 to that permanent or player instead. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Torwaki the Younger deals 2 damage to any target. There's so much fantastic stuff going on here. I'm actually shocked this is only an uncommon. There is so much you can do with this commander. I think it's fantastic. First of all, I can do the, mana barbs way of going things, right? The sort of group slug or group hate sort of effects where I got a mana barbs in play. That is a permanent that is dealing non-combat damage. So now instead of dealing 1 damage, it's going to deal an additional damage because of my commander. And of course, there is an absolute ton of cards that are going in that direction. I also have this ability stapled on my commander whenever I cast an instant or sorcery. So I want instants and sorceries in this deck as well. In fact, you can even sort of ignore the first ability and just do a Spellslinger theme. But we can do both, right? Because of course, there are instants and sorceries that will be dealing non-combat damage to your opponents. So you can double up there and do both. And of course, your commander is also also dealing 2 damage to any target, which is fantastic. And it also has lifelink. So whenever that second ability triggers, you will also be gaining life. So you're getting a little bit of a life gain theme here as well. There's so much going on here. Everything that is going on this card is fantastic. It also works together, but it can also not work together, where you can go in a lot of different directions with it. Again, this is another commander that you can do so much with. It is fairly open-ended, and I think we're going to see a lot of Torwaki decks that are going to be different from other Torwaki decks, which I always like to see in the format. Fantastic commander, I think. Coming in at number 2, Verak, Warped Singir, 1 white and a black. Vampire 2/2, Flying Death Touch, Lifelink. Always fantastic to see those combination of abilities on your commander. More importantly though, whenever you activate an ability that isn't a mana ability, if life was paid to activate it, you may pay that much life again. If you do copy that ability, you may choose new targets for the copy. That is such a very open-ended ability that you can do so much with. And I gave the example in my spoiler video of Marsh Flats. There is an activated ability where you're paying life. So if I pay the 1 life and sacrifice my Marsh Flats, I can now pay 1 more life because I've activated an ability that required me to pay life. So I'm paying 1 more life, and then I'm copying it, and I'm going and getting another Swamper Plains out of my library and putting it into play. Pretty fantastic. And again, this is another commander where I can start digging and finding those really interesting cards from back in the day that don't see a lot of love, that are paying life to activate abilities that might fit really, really well in this deck. And I always love commanders that entice people to go after those cards. Great commander, and it's certainly going to be a popular one in the format, without question. But coming in at number 1 for me is Cadrick, Soul Kindler, 2 red and a white dwarf wizard 4/3. The legend rule doesn't apply to tokens you control. Whenever another non-token legendary permanent enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1. If you do, create a token that's a copy of it. That token gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. And again, when I was doing my spoiler video here, I was just coming up with stuff on the fly. There's so much you can do, right? I made the Flagstones of Trocaire example as one, where that's a legendary permanent. It enters the battlefield. I can pay 1 to copy it. Why would I do that? Well, because on the end step, it's going to get sacrificed. Very, very important wording on this commander that, in my opinion, makes it so much better. So now my Flagstone copy gets sacrificed, and when Flagstones goes to the graveyard, I get to go get a Plains out of my library and put it into play. So now my commander is ramping. Pretty fantastic. There's so much you can do here. Again, very open-ended. Every Cadrick deck is going to look a little bit different. Even that first ability of the legend rule doesn't apply to tokens you control. You can do stuff there, right? I can even just put a Heat Shimmer in this deck, right? I Heat Shimmer one of my legendary creatures. Even my commander, I can Heat Shimmer. So that token copy is going to stick around because it is a token where the legend rule doesn't apply. So you can even do that, right? Flame Shadow Conjuring, which essentially is what your commander is, can go in this deck. Because whenever one of my legendary creatures enter the battlefield, I can pay a red, copy it with my Flame Shadow Conjuring as well as my commander. So now I get 2 copies, right? Because the legend rule doesn't apply to tokens I create. So not only are you doing the legend theme here, you're also doing the token theme because the legend rule doesn't apply to your tokens. So any red effect or even white effect that is creating token copies of stuff is just added bonus to whatever your commander's already doing. So many ways you can go with this guy. I think he's incredibly open-ended. I think he's going to be one of the most popular commanders from the set. That's my opinion. I know sometimes I'm wrong about this. I really think this is a commander that for me is very open-ended. A lot of different directions you can go with it. It's also very unique. It's something that we haven't seen before. And also it's a powerful ability that you can do a lot with, right? That is sort of the criteria that I find makes for a commander that people sort of go after, is open-ended, powerful ability, and also very unique and interesting. And this guy checks all those boxes in my opinion. I think he's fantastic. Best commander from the set in my opinion. And that's saying a lot since we had so many to choose from. Oh boy, what a set this was. Overall, I'm pretty happy, and I will just say really, really ecstatic that I didn't see any commanders that made me groan. I don't know if you guys did, but for me, of all the commanders that I talked about from this set and all the ones I've seen, there wasn't any where I went, oh, here we go, right? There was none of that, which I really liked. Considering how many commanders we had, I really liked that we didn't have any that made me go, oh, that's in the format now, right? There was no super annoying, horrible Staxy commander. There was no super overpowered commander that everyone is going to go after and want to build around. I didn't see any of that. I think there was definitely a few fantastic ones on this list for sure, but none that I would sort of be rolling my eyes or groaning if my opponent sat down across from me at a table and they pulled that that commander out. I don't think there was any. I don't know. Maybe you guys can comment below if there's any commanders in this set that for you were like, oh, I don't want to ever see that in a commander game. For me, I didn't see any. I'm okay with all of these. Really great job I think they did on this set. I'm pretty happy overall. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.